He always said his dream was to wake up to the sound of the ocean. So I sold my apartment, bought a seaside cottage, and gave him the keys. That same evening, he gave me divorce papers. Those words still echo in my memory, not because they shocked me, but because I knew they were coming. He just didn't know that I knew. My name is Elena. I'm 52 years old. I've been married to Patrick for 27 years. Or more accurately, I was. Until the night he mistook my silence for stupidity. We were, by all appearances, the perfect couple. He ran his own consultancy firm. I was a high school administrator, well-organized, emotionally stable, the kind of woman people trust to keep things running. And I did. For years. I managed our calendar, paid the bills, helped him draft his business proposals, cooked for his clients, remembered birthdays, anniversaries, networking events. When Patrick lost a client or a deal, I tightened the budget. When he celebrated a win, I clapped the loudest. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being his partner and became his background, his constant, his convenience. Still, I believed in our marriage. We had built a life together, one that included lazy Sundays, family dinners, and a dream we both shared since our honeymoon, to one day retire by the sea. He used to say, "One day I want to wake up, hear the waves, and feel peace." So when we found a quaint coastal town 3 hours from the city, and I saw a listing for a white-shuttered cottage with a wraparound porch and ocean views, I thought, this is it. I didn't tell Patrick right away. I sold the apartment my aunt had left me, a beautiful, well-located space that was entirely in my name. It had been our safety net for years. Quietly, I closed the deal. I arranged everything under my name, paid in full, decorated the place with soft linen, seaside art, and wind chimes. Then I called Patrick and said, "Pack a bag. I want to show you something." He was delighted. "A surprise?" "This is new," he said, kissing my cheek. "You're spoiling me." We drove there together. He hummed along to his favorite playlist. He held my hand at red lights. At one point, he said, "I love you, you know that? You always make life better." I looked out the window and smiled. "Do I?" I thought. When we pulled up to the cottage, Patrick gasped. "Elena, this is incredible." I handed him the keys. "It's ours," I said softly. He turned to me, eyes glassy. "You bought this for us?" I nodded. "For you, really. You always wanted it." He hugged me tightly. "This changes everything," he whispered. He had no idea how true that was. That night, after dinner, after wine, after a slow walk along the beach, he pulled a folder from his bag. He placed it on the table beside the candlelight. "Elena," he said, "I didn't plan to do this here, but I've met someone. This is divorce paperwork. I thought this would be clean, dignified." He expected me to fall apart, but I just blinked, then smiled. "Thank you," I said. And that's when he began to lose control, and I began to take mine back. People think betrayal comes in a flash, one violent moment, one scandal, one lie. But real betrayal, it's quieter than that. It happens slowly, like water wearing down stone. And by the time you notice, the foundation's already hollow. Patrick and I met when we were both 24, two wildly different people who somehow fit. He was magnetic, impulsive, full of ideas and bold dreams. I was careful, steady, already thinking 5 steps ahead. In many ways, I grounded him, and in return, I thought he made life feel more alive. We got married a year later in a modest ceremony by a lake. No big speeches, no extravagant decor, just the two of us, saying forever without understanding what that would eventually cost. In the early years, I supported both of us while he jumped from startup to startup. He had ideas but never followed through. Still, I believed in him. I edited his pitch decks after work, cooked dinner while he researched markets, used my credit card to keep us afloat while he waited for the next big break. He promised it would all be worth it. That one day, we'd sit on a porch somewhere near the sea with coffee and salt in our hair and laugh at how hard it had been. So I waited. I worked. I adjusted. When I got promoted to department head, Patrick said, "That's great. Less pressure on me now." When I got tenure, he said, "Finally, we have real security." I thought we were building something together. Turns out, I was just giving him soft landings while he rehearsed his next takeoff. Still, I dismissed the red flags, the work trips that got longer, The texts he wouldn't let me read. The quiet nights where he sat beside me, physically present, emotionally absent. I told myself this is what long marriages look like. People get comfortable. They change. And I loved him. Or maybe I loved the idea of us, of who we used to be. I even remember the last time he looked at me the way he used to. It was 2 years ago on our 25th anniversary. We were at a little cabin in the woods, a gift I booked myself because he forgot to plan. We sat under the stars sipping wine, and he said, "You've always been my anchor." Back then, I smiled and thanked him. Now, I realize anchors keep you from drifting, but they can also keep you stuck. When we got back from that trip, something changed. He grew colder, more distracted. Business was stressful, he said. He was tired, overwhelmed, needed space. I offered patience. He took silence. I didn't know then that another woman was already orbiting him. Someone who saw only the shine, not the truth. Someone who hadn't cleaned up after his failures or patched up his broken dreams. Her name would come later, but by then it wouldn't matter. Because by the time Patrick handed me that folder in the seaside cottage, I wasn't a woman caught off guard. I was a woman prepared. And his mistake wasn't cheating. His mistake was thinking I wouldn't know what to do once he did. They say your body knows long before your mind is ready to accept it. Mine did. I started waking up at 3 a.m. with a tightness in my chest. I'd roll over and look at Patrick, asleep, peaceful, undisturbed. Sometimes I'd hear the soft vibration of his phone on the nightstand. He never moved to check it. He had long since learned to silence notifications around me. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto him, that after nearly 3 decades, of course things would feel different. But it was more than distance. It was strategy. He had become too careful, too considerate at the wrong times. He no longer complained about work, but also never let me visit his office. He started forgetting to include me in plans, business dinners, weekend trips, even birthdays. One day, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket. A boutique hotel across town. The date matched a night he said he was in Baltimore. I turned the paper over and saw her name scribbled in Sharpie, Michelle. Room 203. My hand shook, not from shock, but from clarity. Still, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I put the receipt in a file marked House Repairs and slid it under a stack of manuals in my desk drawer. That night, I kissed him goodnight and said I loved him. That was the moment I knew I would leave him. Not emotionally, I had already done that. I would leave him on my terms, and he would never see it coming. Over the next month, I started collecting shadows. I checked our shared bank account. Small transfers, just under $2,000, sent to a new consulting vendor. I Googled the business. It didn't exist. I pulled our credit report. His card had several luxury purchases, jewelry, spa packages, a pair of Italian shoes, size 7 women's. I took screenshots, printed statements, bookmarked every article on digital infidelity tracking. I created a secure folder on a cloud drive and labeled it Garden Plans. One evening, Patrick mentioned a conference in Palm Beach. I smiled, nodded, and booked myself a quiet Airbnb just outside the coastal town we used to dream about. I spent 2 nights walking along the beach, breathing, thinking, remembering who I was before I became his support system. On the 3rd day, I made a decision. I called Danielle, a former student of mine who had become a lawyer. She had once told me at a reunion, "If you ever need legal help, I'm the calm before their storm." She was right. We met for coffee. I showed her everything. The receipts, the bank statements, the prenup. She read it twice, then leaned back. "You've got him. Hard. He won't know what hit him." There was a clause in the agreement, buried, half forgotten, and that said in the case of infidelity, all shared property reverts to the spouse who didn't violate the terms. I remember laughing, not out of joy, but out of poetic disbelief. He had insisted on the prenup back then, to protect his future. Turns out it was my parachute all along. From that moment on, I moved with precision. I reached out to a realtor, quietly listed my apartment, made sure it sold privately. No social media, No signs. Patrick thought I was attending a teacher's retreat. I was finalizing a wire transfer on a house by the sea. A house I bought in my name. With my money. With my peace. All while he planned his grand betrayal. He thought I was blind. But I was watching. And soon he'd learn what it means to be seen. I've always believed that true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about design. I didn't want to ruin Patrick's life. I wanted him to walk straight into the future he'd built and realize every piece of it belonged to me. After Danielle confirmed the prenup strength and advised me on the legal steps, I spent the next 4 weeks orchestrating my departure, but not in a rush. This wasn't about escape. It was about timing. I began by finalizing the sale of my apartment. Quietly, discreetly. The buyer was a retired couple who loved the layout and paid in cash. It was clean, fast. The proceeds went directly into a separate account in my name, shielded from joint access, documented with Danielle's help. Then I went house hunting. The cottage wasn't just perfect, it was poetic. A little white home nestled between dunes, facing the Atlantic, with pale blue shutters and a weathered deck. The realtor called it a place for peaceful living. I called it the final chess move. I purchased it in full. No mortgage. No trace of Patrick's name. Then I did what no one expects from a woman who's been betrayed. I planned a surprise. I told Patrick I wanted to take a weekend off, just the two of us. I pitched it as a spontaneous trip to recharge. I mentioned nothing about the stress I'd seen on his face lately or the late-night texts he thought I didn't notice. He lit up like a child at Christmas. You're serious? Just us? That's unexpected. I smiled. You've been working hard. You deserve a break. He didn't know I meant from pretending. The day we left, I packed his favorite snacks, curated a playlist, and acted like the woman he used to love. Or the version of her he remembered. Dependable, sweet, naive. He held my hand in the car and said, You've been different lately. Softer. It's nice. I nodded. I've been thinking a lot about the future. When we pulled up to the cottage, he stared, stunned. Elena, you bought this? I handed him the keys. It's yours. He blinked. You mean ours, right? I smiled. He spent the first hour exploring every room, running his fingers along the wooden beams, gazing out the kitchen window at the waves. I can't believe you did this for me, he said, voice low. For us, I corrected. Isn't this what you always wanted? He kissed my forehead. It is. It's perfect. That night, I cooked dinner, shrimp pasta and white wine. He toasted to beginnings. I toasted to endings. And after dessert, he did it. He pulled a folder from his bag, cleared his throat, and said, There's something I need to tell you. I already knew. He slid the papers across the table. Divorce papers. Cleanly typed. He'd even highlighted the clause about fair asset division. Bold of him. I've met someone, he said. It wasn't planned, but it's real. I didn't want to do this here, but this just felt right. He smiled like he expected me to break. But I didn't. I simply slid a second folder from my own bag and placed it beside his. What's this? He asked. A response, I said. He looked confused, then opened it. Inside was my legal filing, our prenup clause highlighted, copies of his financial discrepancies, photos of him and Michelle at a hotel, and a cover letter from Danielle. He went pale. Wait, you knew. For a while, I said softly. I just wanted you to see your dream come true before I took it back. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. That's when I stood. I kissed his cheek. Enjoy your evening, Patrick. You won't be staying here. And I walked out the door, locked it behind me, and left him sitting in a cottage he thought he owned, surrounded by proof that he had already lost it all. I drove back to the city that night with the windows down, the wind cold against my face, and something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the moment he handed me those papers. I didn't feel regret. What I felt was peace. The kind you only find once you've stopped pretending someone else deserves your silence. By the time Patrick tried to call me, I had already blocked his number. I knew he'd try all the stages. Confusion, anger, pleading. I had no interest in hearing any of them. Danielle had already filed the official divorce response with the court. Attached was the prenup, the evidence of infidelity, the financial records of his secret withdrawals, and our request to freeze all joint assets pending a full investigation. That meant he could no longer access our retirement savings. Our joint credit cards were disabled. The consulting firm's business account, the one I had helped build, was flagged for audit after a quiet tip from Danielle about suspicious withdrawals. Michelle, as it turned out, didn't like men who couldn't pay for champagne and penthouses. By Wednesday, she was gone. I didn't have to lift a finger, but I did send Patrick one message. It was short, just a photo of a signed document, the cottage deed, with my name and only my name typed in bold. Underneath, I typed, "You said this was your dream. Thank you for giving me a reason to make it mine." He didn't reply. Instead, I got a message from his lawyer the next day, a vague attempt to dispute ownership of the cottage and request access for personal belongings. Danielle sent back a 2-line email. Our client is not obligated to provide access to a property solely owned under her name. All property rights remain legally protected under the marital infidelity clause. Kindly refer to the attached. The attachment? That same prenup Patrick had proudly drafted 27 years ago when I had more money than he did. The one he insisted we sign to protect his future. Now it was his ruin. The locks on the cottage were changed the day after I left. I made sure the utilities were transferred to my name and that every legal record pointed to sole ownership. Danielle handled all communications. I never had to speak to him again. That Friday, I visited the cottage alone. The air was different without him. Lighter. Even the floorboards seemed to breathe easier. I placed fresh flowers in the kitchen window and lit the fireplace. I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, listening to the waves, the very sound he once said would make him feel whole. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. He had tried to replace me, but I had already replaced him. Not with another man, but with freedom, with silence, with self-worth. Patrick's consulting business began collapsing shortly after. Without access to funds and with rumors circling about fraud, his clients started pulling away. He sent one desperate email to Danielle, asking if I'd be willing to settle quietly to avoid damage to his professional reputation. She responded with one sentence. My client has already settled with herself. No further response. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Patrick moved into a small rented apartment in the outskirts of town. The fancy car was returned. Michelle blocked him on everything. He had told her he was about to be financially free. In the end, he was just not the way he imagined. As for me, I started sleeping in the cottage full-time. The bed felt bigger without resentment. The rooms echoed with peace. I started reading again, writing again, breathing again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't dance. I simply existed. And after all those years of shrinking to fit into Patrick's plans, that in itself was the loudest revenge of all. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slamming fists. Just paperwork, calm voices, and consequences. Patrick sat on one side, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit was wrinkled, collar wilted, hair slightly disheveled like he hadn't slept. I wore navy blue, clean lines, no makeup, just confidence. Danielle stood beside me, poised and quiet. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to win. The judge reviewed the files, infidelity evidence, account withdrawals without spousal consent, hotel receipts, text messages, the prenup. It was all there, neatly arranged in color-coded tabs. Patrick's lawyer tried to argue the prenup had aged out, that it was signed under different financial conditions. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, looked at him and said, Section 14 states clearly the agreement applies for the duration of the legal marriage. That includes the present. His lawyer fumbled, flipping through the document like he hadn't expected that page to exist. Danielle leaned over and whispered to me, They thought you were bluffing. Patrick finally spoke. Elena, can't we handle this like adults? We were married for 27 years. That has to mean something. I looked at him. It does, I said. That's why this hurts. But that's also why I'm not letting you rewrite history. The judge ruled within the hour. all jointly held accounts to remain frozen until the final settlement. Patrick forfeits any claim to the seaside cottage. I retain 100% of the proceeds from my sold apartment. Court costs is to cover. Patrick's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes didn't meet mine. Afterward, in the hallway, he tried again. Elena, I was lost. I made a mistake. No, I replied. You made a plan. I just made a better one. He nodded slowly, swallowing the last bit of pride he had left. That night, I returned to the cottage. The sky was overcast. Rain tapped softly on the windows. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in a shawl, and stared at the sea, steady, endless, honest. 2 days later, the cracks in Patrick's life deepened. Word spread in his professional circle. A client I used to make tea for during their meetings called me personally. I heard what happened, she said. I never liked the way he spoke to you. If you ever want consulting work, let me know. Another message came from an old friend of his. I'm sorry, Elena. I didn't know it had gone so far. You deserved better. Even his sister reached out. She'd once stood beside him during family dinners, blindly loyal. Now her text simply read, I was wrong, and I'm proud of you. And Michelle? She left a voicemail. Short, bitter. He said he had money, said he had control. Turns out he doesn't even have the house. I deleted it. I didn't need her apologies, just as I didn't need his explanations, because I already had the truth, and peace, and the property deed. I had everything that mattered. The rest? Let it collapse. Let it all fall where it belongs, behind me. The cottage felt different now. Not like a getaway. Not like a place I had to share. It felt like mine. The kitchen smelled like fresh bread again. I let the windows stay open longer. I filled the rooms with books and plants, things Patrick never noticed but always complained were clutter. There were no more hushed arguments in my head. No more tension in the silence. Just the sound of the sea, the occasional creak of old wood, and the peace of my own breathing. I started doing small things I hadn't done in years. I joined a local reading group at the town library. I baked pies for the weekly market just to share. I even signed up to teach a short community workshop, how to understand your finances after divorce. At first, only 3 women showed up. By the second session, it was standing room only. Widows, young wives with questions, single mothers, women who'd handed their financial lives over, just like I once had, and were now searching for the manual they were never given. I didn't preach. I simply shared what I had learned the hard way. And they listened. One of them, a soft-spoken woman named Rachel, hugged me after class. You have no idea how much you helped me, she said. I thought I was alone. I smiled. I thought that too, I told her. Danielle called one evening and asked if I'd be interested in forming a small team, helping other women navigate complex divorces with dignity and strategy. I said yes, not out of revenge, but because I finally understood something. I wasn't made to just endure someone else's chaos. I was made to rebuild, to guide, to live, not for someone else's comfort, but for my own peace. And for the first time in decades, I woke up to the sound of waves, not as the woman who gave everything to someone who didn't deserve it, but as the woman who finally, completely, and beautifully belonged to herself. The final court hearing took place on a rainy Tuesday morning. Patrick arrived alone. No entourage, no smile, just a man who looked like he hadn't stood in the sun in weeks. He wore the same gray suit from our first session, except now it looked like it belonged to someone else. I didn't bring anyone either. I didn't need backup. I had already won everything worth keeping. The hearing lasted under an hour. The judge upheld every term of the prenup. My sole ownership of the cottage was confirmed. The remaining investments were split exactly as the agreement allowed. 80% to me, 20% to him. He barely nodded. As we left the courtroom, he tried to speak. Elena, he said softly, if I had known it would end like this. I turned to him, calm, steady. It didn't end like this, Patrick. It ended a long time ago. You just didn't notice. He looked like he wanted to argue, or cry, or maybe just run. But instead he said nothing, and I walked away. No drama, No speeches, just heels on marble, echoing softly down a hallway that didn't belong to either of us anymore. Back at the cottage, the rain had stopped. A breeze moved through the curtains. My mug of tea was still warm, and the sea was calm again, as if it had been waiting for me. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch barefoot. The wind chime rang gently above me. That afternoon, I opened a new journal. The first page, blank and waiting. At the top I wrote, "You don't always get closure from them. Sometimes you give it to yourself." I smiled, then closed the book, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, not of revenge, not of rebuilding, but of rediscovery. The life I had handed away in pieces was back in my hands, stronger, quieter, more mine than ever. Patrick had dreamed of a house by the sea. I gave it to him, and then I kept it, along with everything he never truly saw in me.